Hi everyone, my name is Alex Carlos. I'm a master's student at Merrimack College, master in social work. Um, I'm going to present to you what my findings were on my capstone project. But first, I wanted to give some background on what led me to this. I was really interested in introversion and extroversion's relationship with suicidality, but it was too specific, and it did not give me enough research that would have been able to encapsulate the whole project per se. So that the interest in personality traits, sorry, led me to Digman's five-factor model of personality traits, and I wanted to examine those specific traits, personality traits relationship with suicidality. And I guess the goal of this was determine if there was a relationship between any of those five specific traits and suicidality. And then after figuring out if they had a relationship or a correlation, I wanted to see if any of them were more predictive of developing suicidality and suicidal ideation than the others. So the five personality traits are neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And they all kind of occur on a spectrum. For example, high neuroticism is usually emotional liability or instability, and low neuroticism is fearlessness and shamelessness. And that you can kind of go down the list like conscientiousness, high conscientiousness, perfectionism, low conscientiousness is distractibility. And then I wanted to define my key terms. Neuroticism describes the overall emotional stability of an individual. Extroversion is tendency and intensity to which someone seeks interaction with their environment, kind of like social relationships. Openness is one's willingness to try new things. Agreeableness, how people tend to treat relationships with others. Conscientiousness describes a person's ability to regulate impulse control to engage in goal-directed behaviors. For suicidality, I use two key terms to define it, as there is kind of a lot of terms related to suicide and suicidality. So suicide attempt is a deliberate but unsuccessful attempt to take one's own life. Suicidal ideation is thoughts about or a preoccupation with killing oneself. Now to get into my methods, I used the search engines Google Scholar and Mac Search. My first search was the five-factor model of personality and suicidality, and that gave me 19,100 articles. So I had a long way to go to get to 20. I eventually added some other search criteria: men and women aged 20 to 55, peer-reviewed between 2015 and 2025, and less foundational research. Believe I had one article that was around 2000, and then the full text online and accessible. That yielded around 73 articles. And after that, I read their titles, their abstracts, and when I weeded out some of the basic ones, I eventually read all of the articles and determined if they would fit my research topic. And that led to 20 articles being included in the review, although I used 24 and 4 of them were citations used for definitions for like neuroticism and then suicide attempt. So now to get into my results, neuroticism, it was the strongest predictor of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. Extroversion, low extroversion was associated with higher suicide risk. However, higher extroversion served as a protective factor. I can get into that a little bit later. Openness, high openness is loosely associated with suicide risk in some young and middle-aged adults. Agreeableness, low agreeableness is associated with higher interpersonal suicide risk. And then conscientiousness, low conscientiousness is associated with higher suicide risk among college students, but is context dependent. I believe agreeableness was context dependent as well. So for protective factors, high conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. Those are obviously part of the five-factor model of personality traits. So three of the traits there, when you have a high score of them, they actually served as protective factors. Then social support and secure attachment. Environmental factors, these were risk factors. They included academic stress, age-related changes, and lack of social supports. Now to get into my discussion, implications, personality-informed screenings in therapeutic settings at younger ages, and then tailoring treatment plans to personality traits, with personality traits in mind when people or individuals are experiencing suicidal ideation. For limitations, they're only correlational, not causality. Most studies only focused on college age, young adult, when I was trying to get middle age as well. No consistent measurement tools were used across all of the studies, so it makes generalization somewhat difficult. And then I guess at the end of this, the big goal or the major result, I guess, to take away is, when you're in a clinical setting with a client and they experience suicidal ideation or suicidality or even attempt suicide, the hope is to apply the five-factor model of personality. You could either use a quiz or a questionnaire to determine what traits they are high and low in of the five traits. And based on that, you can determine if they're at more risk. Like, for example, if a client you have is highly neurotic, or if at first they're suicidal or experience suicidal ideation and they're highly neurotic, that increases the likelihood to attempt suicide. So the hope is to determine if clients are either more at risk or low at risk based on their personality traits. Thank you.